Today, we're diving into a huge shift in how we work. It's called the temp economy. It was sold to us as this great path to flexibility, but for millions of people, it's actually turned into a kind of trap. So let's take a look at what's really going on with this hidden workforce. So let's just start with a number, 300%. That is the staggering, explosive growth of temporary employment just since 1990. I mean, this isn't some small, fringe part of the economy. This is a complete overhaul of how companies hire and how a whole lot of us make a living.
And what this massive growth has done is create what you could call a parallel labor market. We're talking about over 3 million Americans who now work through staffing agencies. And they're often doing the exact same jobs that, before this boom, used to be stable, permanent positions with actual benefits.
So how does this whole system actually work? Well, to really understand the temp economy, we have to look at the player right at the center of it all, the middleman.
And that middleman, of course, is the staffing agency. Their business model is pretty simple. They supply workers to companies for a fee. But here's the crucial detail. The temp worker is technically an employee of the agency, not the company where they actually go to work every day. And that little legal distinction, it changes everything. Let's follow the money for a second. So a company pays the agency, let's say $20 an hour for a worker. The agency then takes a pretty big cut for themselves, usually somewhere between 25 and 40%. That means the person who's actually doing the work, they might only see $12 to $15 of that original $20.
And this brings us to the real heart of the issue. What happens when temporary work isn't so temporary after all? It creates something called the permanent temp trap, which is basically a two-tier system inside the very same workplace.
This quote really just says it all. A lot of these positions are only temporary on paper. In reality, they're permanent jobs, but calling them temp lets companies sidestep all the costs and responsibilities of having a direct employee, things like benefits, paid time off, and job security.
And this is what that two-tier system looks like in the real world. Just picture two people working side by side, doing the exact same job. The permanent employee gets better pay, full benefits, and a shot at a real career path. The temp worker, though, they get less pay, almost no benefits, and they can be let go in an instant for any reason at all.
You can imagine the long-term damage this does. When you don't have access to company training or you can't even apply for internal jobs, you get stuck. It becomes a total dead end for developing your skills, basically trapping workers in this cycle of low-wage jobs while their permanent coworkers are moving up. Okay, so what are the bigger consequences of this whole middleman system? Well, that flexibility that companies get, it doesn't come out of thin air. It comes with a lot of hidden costs. And those costs are pushed almost completely onto the workers themselves. First up, a huge one, safety. Temp workers very often get the most dangerous jobs, but with the least amount of safety training. And surprise, surprise, they face much higher rates of getting injured. When an accident does happen, the company and the agency just point fingers at each other, leaving the injured worker with basically no support. Next on the list, straight-up wage theft. This part of the workforce is just filled with stories of unpaid overtime and illegal deductions from paychecks. And because workers can be fired instantly, complaining is a massive risk. If you speak up, you don't just lose your job, you could get blacklisted from other jobs too.
And finally, there's discrimination. The data is pretty clear that women and workers of color are far more likely to get funneled into these unstable temp jobs, while the stable, permanent positions are more likely to go to white men. So this system, it doesn't just reflect inequality, it actively makes it worse.
So, is this trap just something people have to accept? Is it inescapable? Well, not necessarily. There are actually some very clear ways to change things, with strategies for both the workers themselves and for policymakers who could help fix the system.
For workers on the ground, there are some concrete strategies to fight back. First, demanding to be converted to a permanent employee with equal pay after a set time, say 90 days. That right there challenges the whole idea of a permanent temp. Second, document everything, your hours, your pay stubs, your duties. That paper trail is absolutely crucial. And third, organize. Acting together gives temp workers the kind of power they just can't get on their own.
Now, on a bigger policy level, there are 3 key solutions that get to the root of the problem. First, mandating equal pay for equal work. That would take away the main financial reason for companies to replace permanent staff with temps. Second, establishing co-employer liability. That would make the client companies legally responsible for a temp worker's safety, closing that blame game loophole. And finally, putting a cap on temp assignments, maybe 6 months, to stop the abuse of the permanent temp trap.
When you boil it all down, this is the bottom line. The current temp economy socializes all the costs, the instability, the injuries, the strain on public assistance, and pushes them onto workers and taxpayers. At the same time, all the financial benefits of that flexibility are privatized, captured as pure profit by corporations and their staffing agencies.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. The word flexibility sounds great. It sounds modern and efficient, but when that flexibility for a corporation means permanent insecurity for millions of workers, what is the true cost of all this to our society?